How's everybody doing? Great. All right, good. So look, if you don't, I grew up a pastor's kid, right? And this has something to do with the sermon, I promise. So I grew up a pastor's kid, and whatever. That's there's good parts and there's bad parts, right? But one of the things that I was granted doing that is just a lot of insight into pastors and how they can be and all of that. And I've been around a lot of them, and some of them are okay. That's a joke. I'm just playing. Most pastors are great guys or women, but most pastors are great. But one of the things that happens when you're tasked with speaking every week, there's a few things. One is you can dread Sunday morning coming because it never stops coming. The Sabbath always returns, and you got to say something new the next week. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure you do actually, because you sat in church and you've been like, man, this man said the same thing 3 weeks ago. He needs to get new stuff. The relentless return of the Sabbath. And so sometimes that can happen. Another thing that can happen is you get in a groove and you preach certain passages the same way always. You preach them that way because that's how you heard it. You preach it that way because that's how it struck you. You preach it that way because whatever. You can just get in this groove. And you guys have all experienced this if you've been in church, and if you haven't, praise Jesus. But if you've been in church, you've experienced this. You've experienced where a pastor will preach and you know exactly what that man's going to say based on the passage. And man, like that can be super boring, right? And also that can be like, it can feel like you're not getting anything from it, or it can be great. Some people love that. My grandpa, my grandma, she gone to the same church for forever, and they had this one pastor for like 30 years. You knew what the man was going to say. You knew what he was going to wear, You knew everything about him, and that it just is what it is. And I say all that to say this: that's kind of a passage that we're walking into today. So we're going to be talking about Lazarus. So Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. He had these two sisters, and their names were Mary and Martha. And this story gets preached a lot because Lazarus died, and Jesus raised him from the dead. And it gets preached a lot, and the way that it gets preached is this. Jesus, raised Lazarus from the dead, and that's amazing. God can do miracles, right? So you should have faith in a God that can do miracles. You should feel great about the fact that you have a God that can do miracles. Yay. And the problem is you leave after hearing that sermon and you go, that's awesome that I have a God that can do miracles, but where's mine? Right? Like that's the feeling. Maybe you're better people than I am, but that's how I leave hearing that sermon. That's how I leave, because it's like, look, anybody had a family member die? Where was my miracle? I prayed for it. Man, we just had baptisms and everything, and now we're starting this. This is ridiculous. We got to plan this better. Look, those moments, just to be honest with you, those moments screw me up so bad. You see, I was told one time, and it clicked for me. It makes sense that your view of God oftentimes has a lot to do with your view of your Father, right? So if you view your Father as a domineering rule enforcer, you'll view God that way. If you view your Father as a benevolent person, you'll view God that way. If you view your Father as a provider but disconnected, you'll view God that way. You see what I'm saying? And maybe this isn't true for you, but it's a general, it's a good way of thinking. Does this make sense? It's a decent analogy that helps you unpack God and your relationship with God. So I started thinking about it when I was told that, and I was like, man, that makes a ton of sense, because for me, I've never, ever, ever, ever had a problem with the idea that God can do anything. I've never had an issue with the idea that I have a miracle-working God. I've never had an issue with the idea that God would provide. I've never had an issue thinking that, if God told me to do this, it's going to work out. Never had a problem with it. It's caused me to do some dumb stuff because I substituted me for God. But I've never had an issue believing it. You know what I mean? Because that's how my dad is. My dad, I almost called him my old man, but I mean, he's old. So anyway, he's not that old though. If you're his age or older, you're not old. He just is. It's fine. Everything's relative nowadays, so I can say that, and it's fine. Twitter backs me up. So anyway, oh man, my dad, you will never meet a person that will go further and further that will go farther to provide for their family, to take care of their family, to do things. Like, this dude is the cheapest babysitter ever and the most willing one. It's insane. Like, the other day, he came to work out with us, and Nora was there, and I was like, he showed up, and he was like, what are we going to do with her? I was like, I don't know, she can just run around. He ended up, like, handing her off, getting her taken care of, and then we finished up, and he was like, all right, I'm going to take her, and, like, he just left with my daughter, didn't even talk to me about it, and then went and picked up my other one. And I was like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? But like, he's just like that. He always provides. If there's something that needs to be done, he's always the one to take care of it. And if there's something that I want to do, he's always there to support it, right? So me viewing God that way, it just makes sense, right? But what happens when God doesn't do that? Like, what happens when it just doesn't work? And I found a corollary there too, because as I've gotten older, my dad is still my hero, but he's not perfect anymore. Right? Because you get older and you have better perspective and you realize that, like, oh, this human being isn't flawless and as strong as Hulk Hogan, Like, that's what happens. And so you start to unpack that. And I've literally caught myself having the same feelings about God that I've had about my dad as I've started to unpack that he's not perfect. He's still amazing. He's still awesome. It's better that he's not perfect because I can appreciate the things he's overcome. But I've felt... You know how sometimes you can feel that disappointment? And it's heartbreaking because you love that person and you know there's nothing wrong with them, but it wasn't what you thought it was. I felt that way with God too. I felt, when I know that my God can, but he doesn't, the bitterness, right? I'm not saying all of this so that you'll think I'm terrible. I'm saying all this in hopes that you felt it too. Because I'm not trying to come up in here and talk about Lazarus and then you walk out of here being like, well, somebody got a miracle, but I didn't, and I'm not sure what to do with it. You see, this story, it gets packaged because it's amazing. Lazarus he gets raised from the dead, and not only that, it foreshadows Jesus. So there's all of these cool things going on, and it gets taught this way, but this element of like, yeah, but what is just left open-ended. And I think we can fix that. So the first thing I want to, we're going to be in John chapter 11. So John chapter 11, it starts out like this, all right? Jesus is talking to people, and these messengers come up. So Mary and Martha sent some messengers to Jesus because Lazarus is sick. And the messengers come and they say, hey, Lazarus is sick, Mary and Martha sent us. And the disciples are like, hey, we should go. And Jesus looks at them and says, he's already asleep. And they're like, well, that's great. He's going to feel better now. And Jesus is like, no, like he's dead. And they're, oh, man, well, if we've been there. And Jesus just says, it's better that he's already asleep because now you'll be able to see me do this. You'll be able to have faith in what I can do. So this is a weird part because Jesus literally said, it's better that the dude died so that now he can work a miracle. It's kind of awkward, right? Anybody else a little uncomfortable with that? Like, hey, you're kind of being a jerk right now, right? So you guys have kids, or you've been around kids, or you've watched people parent kids. This thing happened the other day. So we're sitting in my parents' living room, and Nora, our 2-year-old, like once 2-year-olds, like toddlers, get past the toddling phase, all of a sudden their movement skills get stupid. You're like, how do you have that kind of balance? How are you that resilient? Why is your head like in between your legs right now? Like, how did you get your ankle back there? This is terrifying. Like, she's in that phase where she's just got this pure movement ability. She's not fast yet. She hasn't figured out how to run really, but like, she'll wobble, but she never falls. Like, it's just, she's good. So she's like, feeling real confident. She goes and runs and grabs the step stool. And I'm like, what's she doing with her step stool? Because there's no counter. She's not going to wash her hands. Like, usually she's the type, she'll announce what she's going to do. Like, I have to pee, She's like that. And so she brings this step stool in, and she sits it right next to this little swing that's for her little sister. And this swing is like short. The thing sits like 6 inches off the ground. Like, she could literally just plop into it. But for whatever reason, she's decided she's going to step up on the stool and step into it, right? Great idea. And I'm sitting here watching this happen, and I'm like, well, I could stop her, or I could just let her learn her lesson. Because the swing's soft, she'll be okay. It'll work out. My wife's in here, so I'm trying to think of all the things that make me not a bad parent. Let's let this play out. So she steps up on the stool, and she leans down to grab at the swing, and she can't, and then she's doing, and then she just steps, right? And she ended up landing on her feet. She didn't fall. It was all good. But I let it play out. Like, sometimes when you are a person that knows better and knows more, you let things play out because the lesson learned is more valuable than the command given. You know what I mean? And so could Jesus command Lazarus up out of the grave? Could he have commanded him not to be sick from where he was? Absolutely. But he let it play out because the lesson learned is going to be more valuable than the command given. So anyway, they send somebody to him. And so the first thing that I want to say here is this: you have to be bold enough to believe. If they hadn't sent anybody, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. It takes some boldness to just believe that God can. Here's the problem. Oftentimes we stop there. Oftentimes the boldness to believe is where it ends. See, if you're somebody that's always chasing a miracle, you have belief, but you've stopped at belief. You're not building faith yet. Does this make sense? And I can get stuck there. We all can get stuck there. I'm going to get ahead of myself. Let me keep going. So you get to verse 17, and Jesus has told the disciples, come on, we're going to go. And in verse 17, it says this: on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in their loss. When Martha heard Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So this is an interesting situation. So there's another story in the Bible where Mary and Martha are there, and Martha kind of gets called out for for being a busybody. Like, she just has to keep her hands busy. Not a busybody like in everybody's business. A busybody like literally she has to keep her body busy. You know what I mean? Like, she's just moving all the time. She got to be cleaning. She got to be doing stuff. And Mary's just sitting there with Jesus. And Jesus looks at Martha and is like, hey, like, can we hang out? Like, and okay, so in this passage, or in that story, Martha ends up being the one that in church circles, we make fun of her. Because that's what we do, I guess. I don't know. We make fun of all kinds of characters. It makes us feel better. So, if you've been in church a while, there's some lady, and it's always a lady. It's never a dude, because nobody looks at a dude and be like, hey, Martha. I mean, I would do that, but, So anyway, it's always a lady. There's always a lady that works really hard and is always doing stuff, and somebody will walk up to her and be like, okay, Martha, calm down. We're going to help you. It's like, that's just a thing, right? So Martha gets made fun of. But in this passage, Martha's the one who runs out to Jesus and says, and has the conversation. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Well, he's going to rise again. Yeah, I know he will. No, I mean, he's going to rise again. Right? She goes and talks to him, and Mary stays at home. This is the important sermon. It's not an outline. But what you got to know is there's going to come a day where your biggest weakness will be your biggest strength. And there's going to come a day where your biggest strength will be your biggest weakness. It depends on the context you're in. There's just times where the things you're good at, they hamper you. And so that's why we need each other. You got Mary and Martha lifting each other up. They're balancing each other out. They're taking care of one another, right? We all need that. Because see, Mary, the thing that made her sit at Jesus' feet and just talk is the same thing that made her stay in the house and grieve. And the thing that made Martha get up and constantly clean is the same thing that could not allow her to stay in the house without going to talk to Jesus, right? But the second point is this: you have to be bold enough to talk to him. They both talk to him. See, at the end of the day, if you believe, you're going to have to talk to him, right? If you believe, if you have faith, you're going to have to talk to him. What the conversation looks like might be a little bit different, but you're going to have to talk to him. You have to be bold enough to talk to him. If you believe, you can't just not talk to him. You can't just let it be. It'll all fall apart. Your faith will fall apart. You have to be bold enough to talk to him. So, Martha in this case has this conversation, and she still doesn't quite get it. I think my conversation with Jesus would be a lot more like Mary's. If you had been here, he wouldn't have died, and that's it. The good news is God's good enough to take care of us no matter how we react, right? You got to be bold enough to talk to him. This is Jesus' reaction to Mary. When Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then the shortest verse in the Bible, 11:35, Jesus wept. Right? So Jesus knew what he was doing. Remember this. He knew that Lazarus was dead. He knew what he was walking into. He knew what he was doing. He knew that he was going to raise him back up from the dead, but he still wept. He still grieved with them. If Nora had fallen and hit her head trying to get into that swing, step down into that swing, I would have picked her up and I would have felt terrible and I would have held her and I would have said, it's okay. And I would have been softer than any of y'all seen me be because I love her and I care for her. You see, you have to talk to him because part of God's promise is fulfilled in the empathy. Part of God's promise is fulfilled just in his presence. If you don't talk to him, if you don't believe in him, you don't talk to him, you're not going to be in his presence and you're not going to feel that promise being fulfilled. The next thing that happens, I'm going to paraphrase it. The next thing that happens is like, when you read it in the Bible, it sounds pretty matter of fact, but I think if I paraphrase it, it'd be a little So Jesus says, take me to him. And they're like, okay. And then he says, roll the stone away from the tomb. Roll the stone away from the tomb. So the tomb would have been like this hole that was carved into a hillside, and then there would have been a stone in front of it to lock it up. Roll the stone away from the tomb. Okay, this is annoying on so many levels if you're the people standing there. Number one, hey bro, you're the healer and you came 2 days late. He died 4 days ago. Number two, that stone's heavy. And number three, and they say this, he stinks. He's been dead for 4 days. You have to be bold enough to be patient, because sometimes God don't make sense. Right? Like, you came late. How many times have you had this conversation with God? God, you're late. You stink. And that's going to be too much work. Right? Thank God that he's patient with us. You got to be bold enough to be patient, because Jesus came in with a plan, and he's always got a plan, right? He's always got a plan. And the plan ultimately is going to be better than our plan, but it takes time to pan out. Some of the things in my life that have made me feel the stupidest, that have crushed me the most, are times when I was forcing things because I wasn't patient with God. Some of the times that have developed the most bitterness in me towards God are times when I was expecting something that didn't come when I thought it should come, right? And so typically, this is where this sermon would end, right? Jesus saves the day. We have to be patient because he's going to perform a miracle. We have to believe in him. We have to talk to him. Maintain your relationship with a miracle working God, because he's going to do a miracle in your life. And he will. But it might not be the one you want. And it might not be when you want. And it might not make you feel better. See, here's the problem. We spend our lives searching for miracles when what we actually need is faith. A faith that is only found in miracles is a faith that has no foundation at all. So the last point is this: you have to be bold enough to receive, no matter what it is. You have to be bold enough to receive, no matter what it is. We spend our lives looking for miracles, and what God's given us is faith that sustains us. Yes. We want to get through the next day. We just want to get over the hump. We just want to feel better. God's not so concerned about us feeling better. He's concerned about us being better. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's faith that's going to get us through. And if you came here today looking for a miracle, let me tell you this: the miracle you need to experience every day is the faith to get through the day, the hope to get through the day. And that's what God gives us every day. Yeah. He gives us the miracles when we need it. He gives us the faith always. And so this sermon was, we write in teams, and this sermon was actually written by Emily Bradford. She's one of our, she's the watch party director, so she manages all of our watch parties. Before that, she was a youth pastor, and she came up through the youth group when me and Logan were leading it, and ended up being an intern, and then kind of came on the team and all of that. And so she's been around for a while, and we get along great because we're the same. So I say horrible things, and she doesn't judge me. And it kind of goes vice versa, right? You need people that are just as screwed up as you in your life. And she wrote this sermon, and the story in that is amazing. Emily's dad he passed away from COVID, and it was very early on, and so I don't know if she got assigned the sermon or if she picked it, but when we were writing in the teams, she ended up with this passage, and so she wrote this. And what I find interesting about this is I watched this process happen. So let me just say this. For me, when I go through personal tragedy, and I have no understanding of the tragedy that she went through with her dad, but I've gone through some personal tragedies, and when I go through them, my process doesn't really look like this. It starts with begging. It becomes pleading and begging. And if it doesn't work out the way I want it to, it turns into silence for a little bit. I don't know, maybe I'm spoiled. I don't know, maybe I just get angry, whatever. That's just me. And I always come through. God's faithful. It works, right? Like I said, I'm trying to just be as open as I can so that you can know. I just hate it when pastors get on stage and you feel like they're perfect, and then you find out they're not and you're disappointed. I'm just going to let you know up front. You know what I mean? I came in a t-shirt today, so you can probably figure, but I'm going to confirm all questions. So my process doesn't really look like that, but I through the grieving, some of the grieving process and getting coming out of all of it, I was keeping up with Emily, and it's crazy because I watched her do these things. So I was there that night, and it was a struggle to believe, but I watched her believe. I was on the phone, and it was, how you doing? Well, emotionally I'm shot, but spiritually I don't know if I've ever been better. She's talking to him. I was there, like with the patience part. In this case, the patience was extra. It's, God, when am I going to get through this? But also patience with everybody around you, because COVID is a talking point. Everybody's got an opinion. And when it's personal to you like that, that's painful. People's opinions are painful, So me being up here being like, master dumb. Well, that sounds totally different to somebody who's been through something, And so I watched her patience with that, but I also watched her patience with how God was going to come through for her family. I watched that happen. And then I watched as she's been willing to receive whatever the healing that God has brought to her looks like. I've seen that happen. And I'm not saying all this to brag on her at all, because we're a lot alike, so she sucks too. I'm not supposed to say that word, I'm sorry. No, she's great. I'm not saying all this to brag on her. I'm saying this because I've seen it work. So I've been working out a lot lately. You can't tell, but it's because I started from a fluffy place, And I've worked out since I was 15 years old, but I've also eaten whatever I've wanted since I was 15 years old, and it caught up to me somewhere around 25. And so that just is what it is, right? So, but I kind of, COVID, I ballooned, and I was like, oh man, this is uncomfortable. I can't buy a whole new wardrobe. It will crush my ego. So we started working out, and we were working out a lot. And this is what happens when you work out. You start reading about supplements. You know what I mean? And here's why. Because you hurt. And anything that can make the hurt go away, you want that thing. And there's a problem with supplements. Supplements are like bad advice. Supplements are not regulated. I don't know if you know this. The FDA does not regulate supplements. They hit the shelves, and if somebody gets sick, they pull them off the shelves. That's the way the FDA regulates supplements. So if somebody tells you that something's good for you, just expect for that to be like free advice. It probably sucks, but that's the way supplements work, okay? And so I've been working out, and I'm in pain, okay? Like, the working out we've been doing is a ton of leg work, okay? And here's the thing about leg work. It hurts. Like, when you can't sit down on the toilet right, it messes up your day, right? Like, right? That's what I was going through. It was bad, man. And then like I've never, like we've been doing CrossFit stuff, my hips have never hurt before in my life. Like my hips are killing me. I feel like it's terrible, right? So I'm looking at all these supplements and I'm trying all these different supplements. I'm trying everything because I know it's not regulated, so it's just either gonna work or it's not gonna work and I need to throw it away. I'm trying all of it. And I gotta find something that works. So what do? I go to somebody who's used it before, right? And I use what they advised me to use because they told me it worked. This is what I'm telling you right now. There's a lot of people out there that are gonna give you bad free advice. I got some advice that's Bible approved, so it's been tested by a third party, that I've seen work, that I know sustains. This is good stuff. You don't got to try other stuff on. You don't got to try something else out and get sick from it. This works. You can spend your whole life looking for a miracle, and they do happen, and they will happen, but they won't happen on your timeline. What will happen on your timeline is when you wake up and your feet hit the floor, you can have faith. And it's what's going to carry you through. It's what's going to supersede all the chaos. Got to believe. You got to keep talking to him. Got to be patient with him. You got to be willing to receive what he's got for you. But what he's got's better than what you got. Let me pray for you. Dear God, thank you for being patient with us. A lot of times I know I look for what I think the right solution should be. And God, I pray that for me and anybody else that struggles with that, Lord, I pray that you would just turn our heads and help us stop looking for the right solution and help us just start relying on you and having faith that you have it in your hands. God, we thank you for walking with us through it. We thank you for treating us like your children. We thank you for being good and caring about us.
Thanks for watching another inspiring message from the New Life team. We pray that the message you just heard inspires you to grow deeper in your love for God and for others. Here at New Life, that's why we exist. If you'd like to take a step to grow in that walk, click the link in the description and fill out the connection card. See you next time.